In 410 AD, an invading army breached the gates of the Eternal City. The Visigoths spent 3 days looting Rome, the first time in 8 centuries the capital had fallen, challenging the long-held belief that the empire was untouchable. Common historical perception often paints this as a sudden catastrophe, where an unstoppable tide of foreign invaders overwhelmed a stable civilization in a single violent stroke. The reality was a centuries-long unraveling. The fall of Rome was a gradual internal breakdown that left the empire unable to sustain itself. This distinction is clear when comparing the two halves of the world. While the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, survived and thrived for another 1,000 years. To understand why the West vanished, we have to look past the battlefield. The collapse was driven by a self-feeding feedback loop of political and economic decay. Rome never established a formalized system for the succession of power. Without a clear rule of law for who should lead next, almost every transition of power invited a new civil war between rival generals. This data shows the crisis of the 3rd century. In just 50 years, the empire saw more than 20 different emperors. Most were killed by the very soldiers who were supposed to protect them. The emperor's personal bodyguards, the Praetorian Guard, eventually held more power than the throne itself. They frequently assassinated leaders who didn't serve their interests, and once even auctioned off the title of emperor to the highest bidder. Maintaining this level of internal conflict was a massive financial burden. The cost of funding constant civil wars and keeping the military loyal drained the imperial treasury. To pay these mounting debts, emperors minted coins with less and less silver. This debasement caused hyperinflation, making the price of daily essentials like bread rise far beyond what most citizens could afford. The economy faced a further blow as expansion slowed. Without new conquests to provide a fresh supply of slave labor, the Roman systems of farming and manufacturing began to stall. Tax rates eventually became so oppressive that they drove the population away. Some Roman citizens actually crossed the borders to live with the Germanic tribes, choosing life in barbarian territory over the reach of the Roman tax collectors. By 285 AD, Emperor Diocletian concluded that the empire was too vast for one man to rule. He divided the administration into 2 halves, the East and the West. This map shows the split handicapped the West. The East held the population, wealth, and trade routes, leaving the West fewer resources. Cooperation dissolved. The East focused on survival, letting migrating tribes pass through and funneling them toward the vulnerable West. Building tension. This pressure intensified as the Huns, fierce nomadic warriors from the steppes, moved westward, pushing Germanic tribes out of their homelands and into Roman territory. When the Visigoths arrived as refugees, Roman officials exploited their desperation, forcing them to trade their children into slavery just for dog meat to survive. This mistreatment transformed a group of potential allies into a vengeful rebel army that eventually destroyed a Roman legion and killed Emperor Valens and Adrianople. Rome's own internal cruelty and lack of coordination turned a manageable migration into a military catastrophe that the Western administration could not recover from. In the 18th century, historian Edward Gibbon proposed another theory, that the rise of Christianity shifted focus toward the afterlife and eroded the traditional Roman military spirit. However, the Eastern Empire was equally devout in its Christian faith and remained a world power for another 1,000 years. Religion was not a primary factor in the Western decline. The collapse was a result of the feedback loop. Corruption led to civil wars, and those wars depleted the economy. With the treasury empty, Rome could no longer pay its own professional legions. This forced the state to hire the same tribes they had previously abused to serve as mercenaries for their defense. These foreign soldiers eventually realized the central government was a hollow shell. Since they already held the weapons and occupied the land, they simply took control of the administration for themselves. The end of the Western Empire in 476 AD was an anticlimax. There was no final, heroic stand. A Germanic leader named Odoacer simply deposed the teenage emperor, Romulus Augustulus, and the imperial office ceased to exist. The empire had already ceased to function as a unified power. The arrival of a new ruler was merely the final acknowledgement of a state that had long since withered. Rome's fall serves as a case study in systemic decay. It illustrates that no superpower, regardless of its geographic size or the scale of its military, is immune to the failure of its internal institutions. When the bond of civic trust is broken and the economy can no longer support the state's ambitions, the external defenses become irrelevant. The greatest empires are lost from the inside long before the gates are breached.